The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello again, Hambleton folks. I'm back for another run here in North Yorkshire. Now today we're visiting a place that's got On the Hill in its name. Now normally when you come across a place that does have those three words in its title, you know you're going to get a good view. Well, I'm right on top of the hill here, and as you can see, I've got a beautiful view into the countryside. Welcome to the very small parish of Thornton on the Hill. Thornton on the Hill, Thorn Tree Farm on a hill. Hello again, Hambleton. It's time for another chunk of your lovely North Yorkshire goodness, and this week we're hitting an area just to the north of Easingwold, close to the A19. There are seemingly hundreds of tiny hamlets in these parts, and we'll be looking at a collection of them on this run. First up is one that barely even exists. Modern maps sometimes don't recognise Thornton on the Hill. Mind you, there are some good reasons for that. Thornton on the Hill, which is also referred to by another title, the truncated Thornton Hill, is a small dispersed village about 2 miles to the north of Easingwold. It's basically a group of isolated cottages, farms and farmhouses which are spread along one narrow lane which crosses a hilltop. There is a secondary lane too, branching off to the east towards Ulston, which is more of the same. Thornton means Thorn Tree Farm, or perhaps Thorn Hill. The Thorn Hill in question was first recorded in 1167, meaning there's been a settlement here for quite some time. Most of it, though, has now disappeared. Right on the hilltop are the remains of that village. At its highest point are earthworks, showing the remains of house sites, tracks and fish ponds. They belong to the deserted medieval Thornton village. However, some of the materials from that now lost settlement are still in use at High House, Thornton's most historically important dwelling. It's a farmhouse that was once owned by the famous military baronet George Orby Wombwell. He knew a thing or two about escaping. Indeed, the Russians certainly couldn't contain him. Let's have a look at it. So here we have Thornton on the Hill as it was in 1900. It's almost exactly the same as this today. Thornton is what geographers refer to usually as a dispersed village. That means it has no nucleus and all of its residents live in isolated houses that are linked together by way of roads, lanes or tracks. In Thornton, the main lane that does that job runs right down the middle of it, crossing a hilltop on its way. That hill accounts for the on the hill part of the parish's name. It's hard to define where the centre of Thornton lies today, but in medieval times it was a lot easier. At the top of the hill are a series of earthworks. They mark the historic centre of Thornton, but nothing remains of the buildings that used to be there. However, parts of them do still exist, in a slightly different place. Here we are zoomed in on the area where the earthworks are. Take note of this house here. This is High House and it's a Grade 2 listed building. Parts of the building were created using materials from the now abandoned village just to the north of it. To begin with, let's make our way towards this house. The easiest way to get there is to drive through Thornton on the Hill rather than try any sort of walk. Most of it lies on that one lane, so we'll drive it from north to south. In the south, close to the parish boundary at the foot of Thornton Lane, is a caravan park called Thornton Lodge Country Retreats. Family owned and run, the park has a series of holiday homes. It has 30 plots in total, spread over a massive 23 acres. You can be forgiven for thinking by visiting it that you're in the middle of nowhere, because essentially you are. That's the allure of the place. Even so, a lot of people visit it because the beauty of Thornton is that it's only a 5-minute drive away from Easingwold. Thirsk, Harrogate, Ripon and York can all be reached in just 15 minutes too. Each lodge is fully furnished with wraparound decking and all of them overlook the park's private lakes. Seasonally, the population of Thornton rises thanks to this. For the rest of the year, animals probably outnumber the residents, but that's normal. You see, Thornton has never been a huge village. Even though it was at one time a lot larger than it is today, its population has never breached the 100 barrier. During the 1800s, Thornton sported a population of around 70 on average. The highest figure it ever recorded was in 1861, when it had a mind-boggling 97. That's small town territory by some standards. Thornton hasn't been anywhere near as substantial since medieval times. The remains of the medieval village are still visible by way of earthworks at the top of the hill. Why Thornton was abandoned isn't accurately known. The current Thornton village is a much smaller settlement that grew up nearby. So here we are at High House, which was built using some of the materials from the former village, which is just behind this to the north on private land. The house is constructed from gritstone and sandstone with a string course and stone slate roofs. It features 2 stories and an irregular front with 3 gables, complete with kneelers and finials. A carved panel on the left gable includes the date, initials and the cross of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, indicating historical ties to the order. It also has a sundial on an exterior wall. High House was built mainly in the 15th century, however the rear wing dates to the following century and it has had some further renovations in the mid to late 19th century. That's when it was owned by Sir George Aubrey Wombwell, a famous military man whose initials can still be seen on this very building. So who exactly was he? Let's find out. Sir George Aubrey Wombwell, born in November 1832, was a British baronet, the 4th Wombwell baronet in fact. He was the son of Sir George Wombwell Sr., the 3rd baronet, and he was a well-educated man. He attended both Eton College and the Royal Military College at Sandhurst. He was, to all intents and purposes, a military man. In fact, it's what he became famous for. Wombwell was a survivor of the infamous Charge of the Light Brigade. That, for those who don't know, was a military action undertaken by British light cavalry forces against the Russians during the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War. It resulted in many casualties, but George wasn't one of them. In fact, how he survived is quite the tale. The story goes that his horse was killed under him whilst he was on it, and shortly afterwards he was pulled off and taken prisoner, albeit only briefly. Somehow he managed to escape, and after catching another loose horse, he was able to ride back to the British lines, hotly pursued by the Russians. This is all the more amazing when you consider he did this totally unarmed because his sword and his pistols had been swiped from him by some Russian lancers. He retired from the army as a lieutenant in 1855 when he inherited his title. At the same time, he also inherited Newborough Priory in Coxwold, just up the road from Thornton. Included as part of its estate was Oversilton Manor. Wombwell's initials, GOW, can still be seen on one of the manor cottages, and of course, they're also still present on High House. Wombwell was appointed High Sheriff of Yorkshire in 1861, and in the same year he married Lady Julia Sarah Alice Child Villiers, daughter of the 6th Earl of Jersey. At his death, he was the last surviving officer of the Charge of the Light Brigade and was buried in the churchyard in Coxwold. Well, I tell you what, the name High House ain't half right. Look at this. This is the view I've got right now from the entrance to High House Farm. You can see for miles into the distance over there. Such a long way away, and it's a nice clear day today. I know it's a bit cloudy, but you know, you can still see a long way into the distance. They must have a fantastic view at this house here. I would love to live in it. Okay, moving on, let's now drive the rest of Thornton Lane, and there's really only one more thing of note along it, a farm shop just before the northern parish boundary. It's called Farmgate Farm Shop, and it's come a long way since the Parker Nichols family bought the 65-acre plot it stands on in 2005. Back then it was a barren field with no gateway, track or buildings. It was called the Baggins, and it still retains that name now. The site has grown into a productive, bustling farm, business and home. Originally it began by farming free-range pork and lamb. Stepping away from the world of commercial meat production, the family scaled down their herds and began to sell their free-range meat at local farmers' markets instead. At the same time, they slowly started taking on accompanying ranges from local suppliers to complement their meat. Over time, this developed into a wide range of local, organic and artisan products being sold, and the launch of the Farmgate Farm Shop. The Thornton shop opened in 2022. Not only does it serve the local community, but it also offers nationwide delivery with over 750 products available. All of its pork, chicken and lamb are reared on this very farm. No meat is imported here, so when you buy from them, you're supporting an independent business. I'm all for that. Since opening to the public, Farmgate has scooped several awards, including the Best Family-Run Farm Shop in North Yorkshire and Best Fine Meats Retailer in North Yorkshire, both in 2023. They were also shortlisted for the National Farm Shop and Deli Awards in 2024, being recognised as one of the top 7 small farm shops in the country. Right, so that is Thornton on the Hill, the vast sprawling urban metropolis that it is. Next, we're off just up the road to a place that has a curious little name. One way to know that you're in Yorkshire is if you come across a place name that ends in the word Thwaite. They're common up here. See you in one of them tomorrow. Welcome back to Hambleton again, everybody. Now, yesterday you got a really short episode, didn't you, in Thornton on the Hill? Well, this one, let me tell you, is a little bit longer. In fact, there's loads in this place, and it'll take us a good hour or so to walk around this. It's a fairly sizable village. This is the lovely Orchard Village. That's its nickname. Its actual name is Husthwaite. Husthwaite house clearing. Today on TVI we come to Husthwaite, a large village located just under 3.5 miles away from Easingwold. Elfin Beck runs to the north of this one, and it's part of the tributary system of the River Swale. In all, it's a pleasant location, and one that's very sought after for many prospective house buyers. Husthwaite has always been a village that made good use of its land, and it still does. There are lots of arable fields around it, and it's not uncommon to see tractors making their way through the village. However, since the early 17th century, Husthwaite has had a nickname which perfectly describes what it was, and indeed still is. Welcome to the Orchard Village, where fruit, mainly apples, was grown in abundance in a series of orchards. It was then shipped all over the northeast of England. By the late 1960s, though, nearly all of the existing orchards had gone thanks to a labour shortage after World War II. There was very little evidence of its heritage at that time, and it looked as though Husthwaite's days of being fruity were over. Today, though, that's been overturned thanks to a local history project which saw many of the trees replanted. Aiding the resurgence are a new business based at Baxby Manor. Since 2009, orchards of Husthwaite have become well known for their apple products like cider and fruit juices. The local pub also upholds the fruit connection by way of its name, the Plum and Partridge. From it, you can get some great views of the famous Kilburn White Horse. Visit this one and you'll also find a wonderful church, a school, 2 old chapels, a village hall and a playground. Lovely. Let's go. Here's what Husthwaite looked like in 1900. A simple enough village in terms of layout and structure. Most of it was based along 3 streets which all met at a triangular green. They still do. It's only seen a minor amount of development since these days, and essentially it still looks just like this. To the west is Baxby Manor House, which again isn't too dissimilar either now. Running across the northern tip of the village you can see a railway line. Now it's important to note that Husthwaite once had a station on that line. It was called Husthwaite Gate and the station building still stands. However, its location is just outside the parish boundaries. As such, there will be no railway related bits in this episode. We will, however, cover that in a future episode. To be honest, Husthwaite has plenty of other stuff without it. We start with the High Street. That's the road to the east of the village green. On it you can see in 1900 there was the manor house and a chapel, with the church not too far away. Take note of all these tree symbols around the village too, by the way. Those will become important as we make our way through Husthwaite. Our first job is to find that chapel located halfway up the High Street. Husthwaite is said to have been one of the first places in the area to be visited by early Methodist preachers. By 1797, it was regarded as a Methodist village. The chapel you've just seen on that map was the original Wesleyan one, built in 1841. However, as you can see, there are actually two chapels here side by side. When the original chapel closed, it was turned into a private residence, and now it's a holiday home called Colton Loft. To replace it, a brand new chapel was built, and it's literally right next door to the old one. Talk about not going far, eh? The newer chapel was built in 1928. Once the new chapel had been built, the old one was well used for meetings of the WI, the gardening club, harvest suppers, children's fellowship, school dinners, and the village Christmas service. In 2000, it was sold to help finance many alterations to the new chapel, but just 19 years later, the new one too would cease its operations. It was due to decreasing attendance, although the members of the congregation that still remain in Husthwaite today continue to meet in each other's homes or at St Nicholas's Parish Church. So to the church. It occupies a prime spot right in the middle of Husthwaite, overlooking the central village green. Primarily it's built of sandstone with lead roofs and consists of a nave, a south porch, a chancel and a west tower. The tower has 3 stages. It was built in the 12th century and the oldest surviving parts to this day are the nave and the chancel. The tower was added in the 15th century and the south doorway was replaced in 1683. A porch was added in 1878 before the whole building was restored in 1896. That work included replacing some of the nave windows. The church was given a Grade 2 listing in 1960. Inside, there are some 17th century box pews and an altar rail, a pulpit and a font cover of similar date. There's also a 13th century lead coffin cross and a couple of 18th century war monuments. Now, as far as stained glass goes in this one, I have no idea of how much it contains. However, stained glass is something Husthwaite is known for, thanks to its most famous son. In 1731, William Peckett was born in the village. He was a glass painter and a stained glass maker, and he's often regarded as one of the best of all time. He was based in York throughout his working life, where he was one of the leading Georgian glass craftsmen in England. He might not be a household name, but perhaps he should be. It was William Peckett who was responsible for most of the stained glass and painted glass work that survives from the second half of the 18th century. It could have been so different for him. As the son of a glove maker, he spent his early years working with his father, making them, before establishing himself as a glass painter in Colliergate in York. Peckett worked throughout his life on the maintenance of the medieval glass in York Minster, as well as painting new windows there too. He also undertook commissions for cathedrals, churches and houses, as well as producing windows for a number of colleges, including the fabulous Alma Mater window at Trinity College, Cambridge. By Peckett's time, the medieval art of manufacturing stained glass had been lost, and all that survived were the paintings of enamels onto glass and the process of silver staining. Although most of the work produced by Peckett was painted glass, he did experiment with stained glass and produced windows incorporating it, unlike his contemporaries. He continued these experiments throughout his life, and in 1780 he patented an invention for blending coloured and stained glass together. Although his contributions to the technical development of the craft have been well recognised and documented, his draftsmanship has sometimes been criticised. He attempted to resolve that by employing established draftsmen such as the Italians Biagio Rebecca and Giovanni Battista Cipriani to draw cartoons for him. After his death, he was buried in York at St Gregory's Church. In the church, he has a memorial created by his wife, and what better form for it to take than a stained glass window? Yes, I don't know if there's any Peckett stained glass in this church, but if you come to this church, you will find something on this outside wall here which tells you a bit about the guy. There's a plaque here, as you can see. Thanks to the Husthwaite Local History Society, it basically says William Peckett, 1731 to 1795, born in this village. He played a major part in reviving the art of stained glass painting in this country. Indeed he did. Now that plaque can be found right next to the war memorial, which is there. And all of this is dead opposite the village green. let's talk a bit about this. So now we're off to explore the western end of the village, basically everything from the church up to the end of civilization. As you can see here, it looked a little uninspiring 125 years ago, with an old school near the green being the only landmark of any note apparently. Don't be fooled, there's far more there now. Here is the central green, which the church sits in front of. The roads depart in divergent ribbons here, with the houses a miscellany of architecture. Some have faded red brick and sash windows, whilst others have prosaic cement render and double glazing. There used to be a house on the green, and there's a rather humorous tale connected to it via the 1906 UK general election. During the election campaign, Husthwaite was the venue for an address given by the Liberal candidate for the Thirsk and Moulton seat, John J. Brigg. He was speaking to a crowd of villagers gathered on the village green, where he stated that if he was to be elected, his party would rid the nation of hovels. To illustrate his point, he gestured towards the house on the green, not realising that at the time it was the home of the chairman of the meeting he was addressing. As you can imagine, he wasn't elected. He still managed to receive over 5,000 votes, but it wasn't enough to unseat the Tories. In fact, Thirsk and Moulton has been a safe Conservative seat since it was created in 1885. This house, which looks almost Tudor-like in its outward appearance, is the old Black Bull pub, which closed in 1938. Husthwaite only has one pub today, but it's more of a hotel, if truth be told. Just up from the green, you can see the old school. This is the one thing on this walk I struggle to find anything about. I do know at least that it was a national school. Now a private house, the children of Husthwaite now attend a brand new school elsewhere in the village. More on that in a bit. Next though, we turn our attention to that hotel. It's over the road. Now, one thing you'll definitely notice if you come to Husthwaite is the amount of trees around you. It's a very leafy village. In fact, I was expecting there to be a tree on the village green. If you look on Google Maps, the street view imagery, you can see there is a tree which is supposed to sit in the middle of the triangle. It's obviously been taken down at some point. So why are there so many trees here? Let's find out. This is the Plum and Partridge, which has previously been known as the Blacksmith's Arms, Orchard and Balmoral. Its name is connected to two things Husthwaite was historically known for. The plum part of the name is a nod to the village's fruit-growing heritage, whilst the partridge is to do with the local passion for shooting. Husthwaite has a long history of fruit growing. Apple orchards and plum orchards have been documented here as far back as 1856. However, they declined after World War II due to labour shortages and changing market preferences. Thanks to a recent history project though, some orchards have now been replanted. Husthwaite provided large quantities of fruit to jam factories and markets, with produce transported to Thirsk Market by bus every Monday. The village's fruit was even transported to Captain Cook's ships and sold to Whitby whalers, highlighting its reach beyond the local area. As for the shooting, well, if you stay in this hotel, you can see that connection quite clearly. Each one of its 9 bedrooms has a tall gun cabinet. There are 3 real ale hand pulls on the bar. The choice of beer changes, though Timothy Taylor Landlord seems to be a popular fixture here. It's all run by the same people who own York Marina in the city of York itself. The Plum and Partridge can be considered a sister business to that. So as we know, there's no longer a school in the centre of the village. However, there is still one in Husthwaite. You just have to walk a bit further to find it. That's where we're going next, as we follow Low Street around a gentle bend to the southwest. The school is right on the edge of the village these days. Husthwaite C of E Primary School opened its doors in 1974, amalgamating several local schools from neighbouring villages into one. This is proud to be an integral part of the local community, offering quality education for children aged from 3 to 11 years. Just like the plum and partridge, this too recognises Husthwaite's historical links to the growing of fruit. Its motto is sowing seeds, bearing fruit, harvesting potential. The school building is bright and spacious, and it's fortunate to have extensive grounds which enhance its pupils' learning experiences. They help to promote an understanding of the environment. Although not part of the grounds, the kids must love it here for another reason, because as soon as they get out of the school gate, they're literally seconds away from the local park. But hang on a moment, before we go to the park ourselves, we have this little lane to discuss. There are several things of note up there. However, it's a private road, so we won't be walking it. I can, though, show you what's up there by referring back to our map once again. That area is known as the Baxby Manor Estate, and it's the site of a deserted village which could well have originated before even the Romans were around. The principal residence within it is Baxby Manor House. That in itself is worthy of a lengthy video. On this map you can also see the water-powered Baxby Mill standing on the Elfin Beck. Baxby Manor House is easily the most historic dwelling in Husthwaite Parish today. The core of the manor house was built in about 1300. A chimney was inserted and a wing on the right was added in around 1600, whilst the outer walls were encased in stone in the 18th century. The building has a timber-framed core encased in brown sandstone, and it has a pantar roof too. At the rear, brickwork covers a base crook. Now that's not a common feature. In fact, it's something that's only found elsewhere in northern England at Cannons Garth in Helmsley. The house has 2 stories, a main range of 3 bays, and a gabled crosswing on the right. It was given a Grade 2 listing in 1980, and in recent times it served mainly as a farmhouse. From the mid-1980s, part of its grounds have been used as an unlicensed airfield, and that's still going. The airfield is used primarily by the Baxby Air Sports Club. Baxby Air Sports Club has been training microlight pilots and maintaining and inspecting microlight and light aircraft for nearly 40 years. That makes it one of the oldest microlight schools in the UK. Orchards of Husthwaite are based on the Baxby Manor Estate too. They are apple growers and artisan cider makers, and thanks to them, Husthwaite's reputation as an orchard village continues today. Orchards of Husthwaite was formed in 2009 to replant the vanishing fruit orchards we mentioned earlier. They now use their own fruit to make a variety of products. They include Galtras ciders and fruit juices. They're also purveyors of craft ales and fine spirits. They don't currently deliver, but they used to. You're still welcome to collect from them directly though. Elsewhere on the estate there are some camping and glamping opportunities. The latter is provided by Rufus's Roost, accessed through a forest via a raised boardwalk. Camping-wise, the estate can offer 32 pitches, a pristine clean shower and toilet block, and a small shop stocked full of essentials, as well as a fridge and pot washing facilities too. Believe it or not, by the way, the toilet block has won Baxby Manor a few friends. It's so clean, it's claimed a Loo of the Year award for several years running. Quite a prestigious honour that. And here's a piece on Baxby Mill. Situated on the Elfin Beck, it was water-powered, but the way it operated was a little unusual. Unlike many other mills similar to it, there was never a large mill pond at Baxby. This is odd because the purpose of a mill pond is to provide sufficient water pressure to force a water wheel to turn. At Baxby, water powered the mill via an unusually long mill race or channel, which extracted water from the Elfin Beck some 700 or 800 metres from the actual mill site. In fact, the end of this channel was pretty much where the beck passes under Elfin Bridge Lane, the road that runs from Husthwaite to Carlton Husthwaite. The route of the old mill race is still evident on some aerial photography. Despite this odd powering arrangement, there may have been a small artificial pond that controlled the water flow. If there was, it was likely filled with rubbish by the parish in the late 1800s. At that time, there were no real laws and regulations regarding waste disposal, and it may well have been a convenient spot. Here's the park as we rejoin the route. Our next job is to make our way through this to get to the final area of Husthwaite, and this will involve climbing up a hill. Yeah, this wasn't the easiest footpath to find. You look on the map and you think it goes through the park. It doesn't. It's just before the park's entrance. So yeah, if you want to follow this route, the path you're looking for here is the one to the immediate right of the park's entrance before you actually get into it. So I'm on it anyway, and this will take us towards the Nookin. Using the footpath you can see on the left, which skirts the edge of the park, we're heading towards this street, the one that runs south from the green. It has the village hall, which isn't marked here. After that, we'll then complete the circuit of the village by heading up to Gibbet Hill, where there would have once been a rather foul stench in the air. The street we're on here is called the Nookin, but less than a century ago it had a different name. It was called Pilgrim Street, or at least the lower end of it was. The current Husthwaite Village Hall has only been here for 11 years, but the piece of land it stands on has played host to a communal building for much longer than that. The new hall opened its doors in January 2014, and the village residents think it's a fantastic replacement for the old hall, which still holds a cherished position in the heart of this community. It was built thanks to the generous support of the Big Lottery Fund and other monetary sources. It can seat up to 120 people when it's full. It also has a committee room which is suitable for small meetings and groups. Then of course there's a kitchen which has facilities to cater for large events. There's also a licensed bar. On the regular, the hall hosts things like theatre productions, live music, quizzes, exercise classes, table tennis, short mat bowls, and almost anything the community wants. The Apple Tree Cafe is held here once a month. The Orchard Village Club, the Book Exchange, the Gardening Club, the Film Club and the History Society keep this building well used otherwise. Our last job before we reach the road where we started is to walk up the reasonably steep Gibbet Hill. You can probably guess from the name, but Gibbet Hill has a rather unsavoury past. Gibbet Hill once had a post where wrongdoers were hung up and gibbeted for all to see. Gibbeting, if you don't know, was what sometimes happened to the bodies of executed criminals. They were displayed in an iron cage or suspended from a gallows, and they often smelt foul. There's no gibbet post here these days, thankfully, so we can progress to the top of the hill without any fears. At the top we turn onto Kay's Bank. This is named after John and Sarah Kay, who once lived on this street. John Kay was a well-known horsebreaker in the village. At this point, although you can't see it, we're passing the entrance to a fabulous country house called Beacon Banks, built in the 1850s by members of the Wales family. We'll likely meet that name again in the future because there are several branches of that family still scattered across North Yorkshire, and Northumberland too, in fact. Okay, so with Husthwaite Village visited, we can now move on to another place which has Husthwaite in its name. To get to that, we have to head to the northwest. The sister village to this one, it's got far less than this did, but still manages to put itself on the map by way of a unique sculpture. See you tomorrow. Welcome back to Hambleton again, everybody. Now, if there's one thing you've perhaps learned about me over the years, is that I appreciate a good view. And at the end of this village here, there is a very good view. I'll just show you where I'm currently sat. I'm on a bench, and this is what I can see. The lovely Yorkshire countryside. Fantastic. Now, as good as that is to look at, there's something else in this village which is well worthy of your attention and your eyes. It's something called the flower. You'll find it on the village green in Carlton-Husthwaite. Carlton-Husthwaite, peasant's farm near the house clearing. With one Husthwaite behind us, today we're in the other one. This is Carlton-Husthwaite, a much smaller village than the one we saw yesterday, but even so, this one still has ample of interest. Most of Carlton-Husthwaite, which is usually just referred to as Carlton by the way, is situated on one street with a pair of religious buildings at one end and the village hall at the other. Between them there's a pub, a craft studio, Carlton Hall, the village green, and a curiously shaped metal structure that sits on it. North of it all, the parish covers an area called Carlton Common, a short spur of land that doesn't really look like it should belong to it, but it somehow does. By far and away, the landmark with the best story to it here would be that metal thing on the green. How it got there and what it represents is all to do with Fareham, a town in Hampshire on the south coast, close to Southampton. When they were looking for something to celebrate their town 25 years ago at the turn of the millennium, they found themselves looking north towards Yorkshire, and more specifically, Carlton-Husthwaite. That's because this village at the time was the home of the last working ironmaster in Britain, Chris Top. Via his company, West Street in Fareham is now adorned with 3 wrought iron sculptures made right here in Yorkshire. But that alone doesn't explain the one on the green in Carlton, named the Flower. Come with me to learn the rest of the story behind the village's metal plant, a tale which runs through the Russian city of St. Petersburg. Let's go. Here we have Carlton-Husthwaite as it was in 1900. It's not the largest parish we'll ever cover, that's for sure. When comparing the place as it was in this time period to how it is now, not a lot has changed. It's still this very compact village with almost everything laid out along one central road. True, it has gained some bits here and there, but for the most part it still looks like this. You can think of Carlton-Husthwaite as a dumbbell. By that I mean that both ends of it have the heaviest, most interesting bits, whilst the middle section connects them together with a series of lighter landmarks. To the north, there's a road that runs away from the main cluster and ends up on Carlton Common. That's a lot different, being mostly open fields. Carlton is so small that we can see practically everything on this one map. Marked here, you can see a church and a chapel at the eastern end. Next to them is the impressive Carlton Hall. It's not marked as such on this map, but it's the standout building of the village. Also not marked are the local pub, which is here, and the village hall, which is here, off Butt Lane. Let's get things started with that chapel. It still sits beside the church, as we saw on the map, but it's not in use anymore. When it was, this was for the Wesleyan Methodists. It was built in 1869, but now it's a private residence. The church is dedicated to St Mary, and this is a Grade 2 listed building. It was originally built as a chapel of ease to St Nicholas's church down the road in the main Husthwaite village. This predates the chapel next door by more than 200 years, having been built between 1677 and 1685. It underwent a renovation in 1885. There could well have been an earlier building on the same site, although that's never been confirmed by anyone. The church is built of sandstone with gritstone dressings and a Welsh slate roof. It consists of a nave and a chancel in one unit and a west tower too. Inside, many of the furnishings are 17th century, including stalls and benches, a reading desk, the pulpit and its tester, which is inscribed "Feed my lambs 1678. There are 2 bells, made by Smith of York, and they are both dated 1677. There's also a painted coat of arms of William and Mary, and an octagonal font from the early 20th century. So in terms of religious buildings, that's that in Carlton-Husthwaite. The proximity of these 2 buildings does though give us an idea of the attitudes of their respective congregations. The layout makes very clear the attitude of the nonconformists to the established church in Victorian times. Doctrinal and social confrontation could not have been forcefully translated into physical terms any better, now could it? This green used to have a small cottage on it. It was the parish poorhouse, and it was built tight against the east wall of Carlton Hall's grounds. Local legend has it that the poorhouse was burned down by the self-important Henry Peckett, who declared that by doing so he was ridding the village of lurking infections. Note the horse chestnut tree on the green, by the way. That was one of several planted by the Pecketts of Carlton Hall to mark Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. Yeah, I do love a good village green, and this one here in Hill-Husthwaite is absolutely brilliant for lots of reasons. Now, with village greens, you sometimes find there are displays of artwork on them, and this one is no exception to that rule. In fact, there's a sculpture on this green which has quite the story to tell. It goes through St. Petersburg in Russia and Fareham on the south coast of England. Now, speaking of stuff that's been planted, this next thing is a flower, but it's not the sort you can expect to see every year in your garden. It's a sculpture, and it's literally called The Flower. This has a connection to Fareham in Hampshire. Just before the year 2000, their residents were looking for something notable about their town for a project to celebrate the new millennium. They searched and eventually hit upon the name of Henry Court. He was the ironmaster of Fareham, who at the end of the 18th century patented methods of mass-producing wrought iron. In effect, it was Court who effectively enabled the Industrial Revolution to take place. This inspired the Fareham residents to see if there were any ironmasters around today. That's when they found Chris Top & Co. At the time, he was the only remaining ironmaster in the UK that dealt with wrought iron. Top & Co. were duly commissioned to conduct a Europe-wide competition to find 12 sculptures in wrought iron to decorate West Street in Fareham. Several hundred designs were entered, but only 3 were chosen. All 3 came from Russian blacksmiths, and all 3 were based within the same college workshop in St. Petersburg. They were Igor Andrukin, Vladimir Sokonovich and Edward Fokin. So this was all well and good, you might think, but there was a problem. At the time, the Russian economy was collapsing, and any money paid into Russian banks was unlikely to be paid out again. So how were these guys to be paid for their work? Well, the solution was simple. Instead of working in Russia, they would come and make these pieces in Britain. They didn't need work permits to do so because they weren't technically working for any British firm. So, a makeshift workshop was fixed up in a barn on a farm, wrought iron materials were procured, and the work commenced, under the watchful eye of Chris Top. Eventually, their projects were almost ready to go to Fareham. Before they left, though, Igor and Edward orchestrated the building of another piece. That piece is the flower. It was designed as a piece of modern sculpture, but in accordance with the rules of the Fareham competition, it was made using only the materials and techniques of Henry Court. When the Fareham project was all finished, a Russian evening in the village hall was organised with food courtesy of Lena, Igor's wife, and traditional dancing by Galia, Igor's daughter. The hall was packed until after midnight, when Igor officially presented the flower to the village. The debate was then where to put it, and there were several suggestions. Eventually, the village green won the majority support, and the flower was duly installed in its present position by one Maurice Duffield and his forklift. Sometimes at Christmas it gets decorated by local children, and whilst that might not be to everyone's taste, it demonstrates the village's affection for their sculpture. Right, well, if you come to look at the flower for yourself, there's a little display of my own to see too. It's time for the parish notice board, which is right next to the flower. So, let's sort that out while we're here. And there you go, that's Hill-Husthwaite in the books. Although we still do need to complete our walk through this village. And next, we've got a couple of awesome buildings to see. As for Chris Top, he's only recently passed away last year, leaving behind a legacy that will forever live on in the minds and hearts of all in Hill-Husthwaite, and of course, Fareham. Chris was born in 1949 in Bolton. He had no interest in becoming a policeman like his father, and instead was fascinated by historical industrial machines and ironworks. He put tremendous care, curiosity and energy into everything he undertook. He was a lover of old metal, an aficionado of barges, and a peerless advocate of real blacksmithing. Although Lancastrian by birth, his slow, gravelly voice was rich with deep Yorkshire undertones and soulful ponderings. In 1982, Chris moved to Carlton-Husthwaite, buying a house with an old bus garage at the bottom of its garden, which he converted into a forge. Chris Top & Co. was founded. The company's first big break was to forge the gates for Middlethorpe Hall in York, which attracted attention from those in the heritage world. Through his company's restoration work, Chris found himself working with wrought iron a lot. These days, not many people use wrought iron. Most metalworkers have instead swapped to steel. The two are very different. Unlike steel, wrought iron has a grain, much like wood does. Determined to follow the conservation principle of like-for-like materials, Chris set up the Real Wrought Iron Company, which sold re-rolled material. It was this that led him to become the last blacksmith in Britain to deal with it, and to boot, he was also the last known worldwide supplier of wrought iron. Quite the honour. Over the years, Top & Co. became one of the most respected blacksmiths in the country. He worked at places like Buckingham Palace, St Paul's Cathedral and Windsor Castle, to name but a few. Chris and his team powered through some of the most prestigious and historic ironwork the length and breadth of the British Isles. He also built an accurate replica of a Tudor cannon from Henry VIII's ship, the Mary Rose, and tested it in the wilds of Northumberland. As Chris Top once said himself, this was pretty much the most fun you could ever have in a job. In 2019, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution to heritage ironwork preservation. Okay, so here's a bit about Carlton Hall, which is literally behind the flower, next to the green, and within 10 paces of the church. It's a very clustered little village, this. We've so far barely moved. This very large plot came about by the amalgamation of several dwelling sites during the early 17th century. By the 1630s, the important Freer family had two houses here, in the west and the middle of the present Carlton Hall grounds. The Freers were the dominant landowners in Carlton, but a series of misfortunes completely derailed them. Between 1636 and 37, most of the adult Freers died, likely of some kind of epidemic sickness. The ownership of the hall would hot potato around for a while, going through the Harrisons, the Shepherds, the Kitchingmans, and of course the Pecketts, who arrived in 1857. During the 1860s, Henry Peckett built the large Italianate extension at the rear of the house. The front part of the hall is a Grade II listed building. Carlton Hall has had at least 5 owners since 1941. Colonel John Palmer, who is well remembered in the village, was one of them. He arrived in 1963 and had the place for about 10 years. From one historic dwelling to another, next we have the thatched cottage, something of a rare sight in North Yorkshire generally. The thatched cottage was originally constructed as a timber-framed open hall, probably in the 16th century. The prominent wall studs were added later, nailed onto the original frame. The building was Grade II listed in 1960. However, it was altered in 1968 when the through passage and rear aisle was removed and a large single-storey extension was added at the rear. The exposed timber frame at the rear was then infilled with brick, and the house was rethatched with water reed in the year 2000. In 2018 it was put up for sale for £995,000, at which time it had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, a drawing room, a dining room, a garden room and a study. It's the pub next, and you better believe those blacksmiths were very familiar with this. They like a drink in Mother Russia, you know. They would have known it by its previous name, the Carlton Boar. How it got that name was all to do with the village of Rishworth near Ripondon in West Yorkshire. In Rishworth there was once a pub called the Old Boar, and both that and this were once owned by the same chef. It's since been retitled the Carlton Inn, and the Old Boar in Rishworth has now closed. So too did this for a while, until the Sergeants opened its old creaky doors and set about restoring faith in the place. The Carlton Inn makes no great shakes about locality or provenance, and is actually quite appealing in its directness, even if some commentators do describe it as a little bland internally. Date-wise, it's hard to pin down how old this is. An innkeeper was mentioned in connection with the Carlton Boar plot in 1656, but there's no actual evidence that the place was a hostelry back then. You know, we haven't gone very far at all here. I can still see the flower in the distance, and we're almost at the end of the village. So I've just come past, obviously, the pub, and this house on the corner is the Old Hall. the old hall, another fantastic building, and opposite that there's the manor house. Carlton-Husthwaite is full of these grand buildings. Well, the next building I'm about to show you isn't quite so grand, but it's no less important. Let's have a look. Now we're at Croft Lane, and on the end of it there's a quaint little building. This is Croft Lane Studio, and it used to be run by Malcolm Pipes, who dealt in bespoke handmade furniture. Malcolm Pipes was better known as Foxman, in much the same way that Robert Thompson, who we know from many churches, was the Mouseman. Pipes spent 20 years honing his craft at the renowned Mouseman workshops in Kilburn, developing an exceptional skill set and a deep appreciation for traditional woodworking techniques. His work was characterised by meticulous detail and a distinctive fox motif, hence the Foxman nickname. This made him a respected figure in the woodworking community. His little workshop is now a woodwork studio and artisan gallery which showcases local artists and designers from across North Yorkshire. I've linked their Instagram account below so you can see some of their stuff. Some of it looks absolutely amazing. So this is the village hall, which was built in the mid-1990s. Its construction timing was handy for those Russian celebrations because beforehand the chances are they wouldn't have taken place. Before this existed, Carlton-Husthwaite's villagers relied on the old reading rooms for a communal venue. They were built in 1901 and as such they don't appear on the maps we use. They were put up as a communal project on common land where the village pinfold once stood. When this new hall was built, they were sold off and became a private house. The modern hall features a main room, a snooker room, a kitchen, toilets and an outside lawn area with a children's climbing frame. The village hall provides a great place for meetings, club events, parties and functions. It's also available for private hire. And you better believe that snooker room is well used. The fine snooker and billiards facility that it is well supported by Carlton and the surrounding local villages. There are two teams that represent the village in the Rydale Snooker League. League games are usually played on Mondays and Thursdays. With no more village to go beyond the village hall, turning around and heading back is the next course of action. See you shortly. So my route back to the car was actually not the same one as I walked because I opted to come down a footpath which runs through Manor Farm Barns, which I've purposely not filmed because it's a private road with a public footpath running through it and it always feels a bit awkward doing that. And there was actually a good reason to do that, and I didn't know that this reason was going to arise, shall we say, until I actually got to this point here, very close to Ings Lane. I've come across this building here, this green building here. Now I think, I'm not totally sure, I think this is Chris Topp's forge because around the other side of this, which I'll show you in a moment, there is a house on the main street which says Chris Topp artwork on it. I wonder, was this his forge? I don't know for sure, but I would certainly assume it is because, you know, it's got all the usual forge type things, hasn't it? There's definitely some bits of ironwork here. I reckon this is where he was based. Anyway, I'll go around the front and I'll show you the house. Okay, so this is around the front then. This is where I've parked on the end here. Literally that house there is called The End Cottage, and that's that bench where this whole video started. And one of the first things I noticed when I got here, and I thought, oh, I'll save it while the end, is this building here which says Chris Topp Art on the wall, General Blacksmith. Now, I'm no expert, but I reckon this being the front and that green building being the back, I think they line up, and I think they're all one thing. I reckon that green building at the back must have been his forge, because with his name being on this building here, it certainly would suggest it, wouldn't it? Who knows, but I'm just surmising that that was where Chris Topp was based. Anyway, we have completed our journey now around Carlton-Husthwaite village, and what a beautiful place it is. Lots to talk about here. We haven't quite finished yet though. We've got a bit of driving to do to end this one. Before we leave Carlton behind and head to the next one, we do have one other area to see, although I wasn't totally sure if this was worth going to. This is Carlton Common, an arm of the parish that juts out northwards from the main chunk of the village. It consists of one road and a few isolated properties. So this is Carlton Common, and the main property up here was until recently known as Commons Hall. It has every appearance of being a typical enclosure farm of the 18th century. In fact, it was not so deliberately planned. In around 1664, Carlton Common, which was common land as the name suggests, was enclosed. The owner of the Carlton Hall estate was entitled to about 42 acres of it, and these were marked out in one block at the northern end of the common. There's no evidence that in early years this land was worked as a distinct farm. That had to wait until the early 1740s. Its first owner was John Harrison, the husband of Grace Freer. So there you go, that's both of the Husthwaite villages visited, and now we're heading towards the A19. There are two tiny ones to finish this week's run off. The first of them features an old school on the old route of the A19. See you there tomorrow. Welcome back to Hambleton again, everybody. Now this is going to be a very short episode because it's only a small little village. This place used to be a little bit more well known than it is right now. Next to me you can see we've got a major road. That is a road we know very well. That is the A19, and in this particular place it bypasses this village. But it didn't used to. It used to run all the way through it, and I'm currently standing on its old route. This is the parish of Birdforth. Birdforth, Brideford. Next up in Hambleton, we've got the village and parish of Birdforth. Not a place that's massively well known, but a lot of people that use the A19 will be familiar with this one. It sits on the A19 itself, about 6 miles south of Thirsk. Birdforth is a very historic name, by the way. It was the name of one of the old wapentakes or subdivisions of the North Riding of Yorkshire, which covered the area around the village. It literally means Bride Ford, suggesting at one time the road that passed through it crossed the small beck by the church by way of a ford. Birdforth as a village today doesn't have a great deal. It used to have a school and a church, but both have now ceased their respective original operations. The church is managed by the CCT now after having closed due to a lack of attendance. The school, on the other hand, has had quite the storied past. When it closed in 1961, it was to be reimagined as a restaurant. It became a well-loved cafe and a shop too, full of little trinkets to tempt the punters as they travelled along the A19. Now though, it's gone, leaving behind the shell of the old school as a private residence. In this one, we'll also get a look at the very historic Birdforth Hall, a £2.25 million complex of buildings which sit close to the route of the beck. They date back to 1685 and have since been greatly extended. Today they're in use as a group of holiday lets, the perfect place to base yourself for a weekend away exploring Heriot country. Birdforth might have altered a little since the turn of the 20th century, but it still has its rural character, even if the A19 is a whacking great modern addition. Let's go. So this is Birdforth as it was in 1900, and for the first time in a while we've hit on a village that looks massively different to how it does now. The biggest change here comes in the form of the roads. What you see here is one road that flies through the village before crossing the Birdforth Beck. That road is still there, but now there's a second one too, running almost parallel to it. That would be the A19, and now it's that which crosses the historic Birdforth Bridge. The village, therefore, now sits on a loop of the old route, which you might think of as maybe a service road nowadays. It still provides access to the main landmarks. And they haven't really changed, save for the fact that the two main ones are no longer in use as they were on this map. Let's explain. You can split Birdforth up into two areas, north and south. The north has always been the more sparsely populated bit, but it does feature this school. Here you can see it sitting on the route of the old road. The school building still stands today, but there are no children in it. So this is what's become of the road. Once the main street of Birdforth village, this is now little more than just an access road, a loop off the main A19. The A19 deals with the through traffic now, meaning for the most part, Birdforth goes pretty much untouched by modern cars, vans and lorries. Sometimes when bypasses like this are built, it can have a detrimental effect on the villages they avoid. With Birdforth being so small, you'd have thought that to not be the case. You could argue though that having a bypass here does have an effect, and we can see that by way of the old school we've just seen on the map. This is the old school. It was built in the late 19th century, 1875 to be exact. It's an outstanding piece of Victorian architecture which has had a few names in its time. It was originally called Carlton Husthwaite Board School because you'll no doubt have noticed yesterday there was no school in that village. That's because it was here. It did eventually change its name to Birdforth County or Council School, reflecting its location here and not in Carlton Husthwaite. It closed as a school in 1961, but since then it's had quite a storied journey to get where it is today. As you can see, it's a private residence now. A lot of you that know the area might have expected this to look a little different if you've not been past in a while. You may even have been inside this building. In 2005, this was a restaurant called The Gables, but it morphed into something else called the Corner Cupboard. It was a cafe and a shop, and it was a really good place for food, ideal for travellers just passing through. On the inside, it was a warren-like building. You felt as though you'd been transported to a place akin to something out of Alice in Wonderland. Large ornate mirrors hung from every wall. There were silk cushions in alcoves resting on pretty chairs and sculptures of mini cherubs which smiled at you from white wire display stands. You needed a lot of willpower to leave without picking up a trinket from the lovely collection of furniture, home furnishings and knickknacks that were on display. The Corner Cupboard was run by Peter and Gerd Hanley, who were once at the helm of the Abbey Inn at Byland. Now though, the Corner Cupboard is just a memory, and the large conservatory-like outhouse on its front facade, which it was well known for, has disappeared. It closed officially in 2019, although the process of winding up began 2 years prior. Now it's just another residence in an old school, but it's sorely missed by many. So yeah, proper thriving metropolis this, isn't it? It's the kind of place where you struggle to define if there is actually a centre. I suppose if there is a centre to Birdforth, it would be around Birdforth Bridge and the church which we're about to come to in the southern part of the village. Let's check it all out. Now we come to the south of the village, which has a lot more in the way of housing. That said, historically, Birdforth's population has only ever gotten as high as 42. It still remains less than 100 today, which may well have contributed in some small part to the closure of this church. Note too on this map the bridge over the beck and Birdforth Hall too. So here we have the church dedicated to St Mary. This is sometimes known alternatively as Birdforth Old Chapel. It's a former Anglican building which is now redundant, and as such it's currently under the care of the church's Conservation Trust. The church was declared redundant on the 1st of November 1975 and was vested into the trust 3 years later. The fabric of the church dates from the 12th century, although it has had some additions and alterations in the 16th, 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. Primarily made of stone rubble, it has a roof of interlocking tiles. Its plan is simple, consisting of a nave and a chancel. There's also a brick bellcote at the western end, the roof of which is pyramid-shaped, helping to give this church a bit of character. Internally, there's a round chancel arch. In the north wall of the chancel is a carved stone coat of arms, dated 1585. Also in the chancel is a 14th century tomb, the top of which is carved with a sword. The lectern dates from the 17th century and the pulpit from around 1700. The font is from the 12th century and consists of a circular tub on a later base, with a 17th century cover. Most of the Victorian features here were added in 1897 when the church was completely restored. They include the pews and the wrought iron communion rails. That was a restoration that took place despite the serving rector at the time thinking it wasn't worth spending money to restore Birdforth. He even called it a dilapidated old ruin. He wasn't popular, as you can imagine. Indeed, so few people attended his services that he called on parishioners to just walk to Carlton-Husthwaite instead. His objections were ignored and Birdforth was restored, but eventually the church was declared redundant due to a lack of attendance. It's still a nice building though. Some 60 metres or so from the door of the church, the A19 flashes past, and in doing so it crosses Birdforth Bridge. It might be carrying the modern A19 these days, but Birdforth Bridge has been here for much longer than this road has existed. The proof of that can be found literally on it. This milepost on the northeastern side of the bridge is made of cast iron, as many were. It has a triangular plan and a sloping top. On each side are pointing hands. The left side is inscribed Birdforth and the right side is inscribed Bulmer West. That's because this wasn't just a milepost, it was a boundary marker. This is the first time we've seen Birdforth Beck, but it won't be the last. This flows west into the River Swale, running through some more villages we've yet to see. Anciently, this was never crossed by way of a bridge. Birdforth means Bride Ford, so this was literally a ford instead. The bride part of its name is a little sketchy as to its derivation, but being so close to the church, could that be the answer? So let's have a look at Birdforth Hall, or as close as we can get to it. This is, by some distance, the grandest property in the village. In 2021 it was on the market for £2.25 million, and included within the listing were 4 cottages and a swimming pool. Collectively known as Birdforth Hall and Cottages, it was all built in 1685 originally, before being extended in around 1900. It occupies a south-facing position within well-screened gardens and offers well-proportioned family accommodation with 6 first-floor bedrooms. Yes, it's well worth that massive price tag. The property retains period features including an oak-panelled drawing room, high ceilings and cornicing. And the best bit is, you can see some of this for yourself should you choose to stay here for a cheeky little weekend break. West of the house, the original brick farm buildings have been converted into 4 holiday cottages known as the Granary, Stable Cottage, Mill House and Byre Cottage. It's the perfect place to base yourself to explore the area, which tourism guides will tell you is often referred to as Heriot Country. So after making my way back up the A19 on foot, it was time for me to drive down it again to reach the final village in this week's run. The last one to visit this week will see us in a place that's effectively a square-shaped village with a church standing all on its own away to the east. See you there tomorrow. Hello folks, welcome back to Hambleton for the last time this week. Now you might remember on Wednesday I said I like a decent view, and in this village you certainly have one of those. Look at this. This is my view to start off this episode. I'm on a very narrow back lane here which leads to a church, and this is the view you get from just outside the churchyard. Isn't that wonderful? It's the A19 you can see in the distance over there, and we'll be walking up that road in a short while. This is the village and the parish of Thormanby. Thormanby, Thor's Gift Farm. Ending this run of Hambleton parishes this week, we have Thormanby. Like Birdforth, which is just a mile to the north, this one lies on the A19 between Easingwold and Thirsk. The name is probably one of the most interesting things about this little place. Thormanby derives from Old Norse, and we're not just talking any old Norwegian personal name here. It's linked to Thor, the god of war himself. Thormanby is the modern version of the word Thormotha and the anglicised version of the modern Norwegian word Tormod. It literally means Thor's gift, and that can be interpreted as mind or courage, or maybe even both. Before the Norman conquest, most of the land in the parish belonged to the manor of Earl Morcar, with small areas owned by Arkhill and Gamel. Afterwards, the manor passed to the crown and was granted to Robert Mallet. It eventually passed into the hands of the Neville family, lords of the manors of Sheriff Hutton and Raskelf, who held it until the 15th century. Soon afterwards, a familiar family entered the fray. Every time we come to Hambleton, we always seem to find at least one place connected to the Dorneys, and in 1721 this was all theirs. From that date it followed the descent of the manor of Sesse, with most of the land in the village owned by the Viscounts down of Wycombe. So what have we here today then? Well, we have a church, a former Methodist chapel, Thormanby Hall, and 3 former pubs. One of those old boozers hit the news 25 years ago because its owner was trying to shut it down, something the council disagreed with. That's very unusual. Let's go and tell its story. Right then, here's what Thormanby looked like 125 years back, and honestly, there's not a great deal of difference to now. For years, Thormanby has been on the main road through this area, which today we know as the A19. It's not totally linear because of the main area of settlement being a square. That said, most of the houses were on the main road, with a smattering of properties on the other 3 sides of the square. These days, some of those gaps have been filled in. To the east is the church, which has sat in its isolated position away from the main cluster for several centuries. Take note too of the west of the parish. Thormanby's boundaries extend across the farmland, taking in a few bits and bobs, including the old Thormanby Mill, which no longer exists. Let's concentrate on the main village, which will all fit within one frame, always a bonus. That shows how small it is though. The main landmarks are clearly visible here. The church is obvious, that's away to the east on a narrow track. On the main road, now the A19, an inn is clearly marked, and on the square you can see an old chapel, which is now a house. There can be no better place to start our journey around Thormanby than at the Church of St Mary Magdalene, and I think this is among the most beautiful buildings in Hambleton so far. Consisting of a nave, a chancel, a north aisle, a porch and a short stumpy tower, this originally dates back to the 12th century, but there are bits from several subsequent centuries. The north aisle was added in 1200 and blocked up at an unknown post-medieval date. The east wall of the chancel is 13th century, and there's a priest's door from the 15th. The porch was built in the 18th and the tower was rebuilt in 1822. The pews are Victorian and the north vestry was added in around 1900. The last time this one saw some repairs was in 1955, a scheme partly paid for by the Incorporated Church Building Society. York architects Brearley, Syme and Leckenby undertook the work. Henry Robert Whitehead was once the curate of Thormanby. His 4th son, born right here in this village, was Thomas Whitehead, who became a semi-famous missionary and poet. While we're on the subject of famous residents, try this guy on for size. Thormanby was the birthplace of one Harry Pasley Higginson in 1838. He was a civil engineer who was notable for constructing a railway line between Wellington and the Manawatu in New Zealand in the 1880s. After being educated at the Collegiate School in Leicester, Higginson was apprenticed to Sir William Fairbairn in Manchester for 5 years. He then went abroad, constructing railways, canals and waterworks in Russia in 1860 and 61 and in Mauritius from 1862 until 1866. He also did some work in India. In 1872, Higginson was appointed as Superintending Engineer for Railways and Public Works on New Zealand's South Island, where he did quite a lot of work. His work on the Carrawau Gorge suspension bridge earned him the Telford Premium of the British Institute of Civil Engineers. In 1882, he was the chief engineer on the Wellington to Manawatu Railway project. The line was completed by October 1886, some 9 months early. He clearly knew what he was doing. However, aside from all the engineering works, he was also famous for something else. He played an important role in the discovery of dodo bones in Mauritius in 1865. Whilst working for the government staff of the Mauritius Railways, Higginson came upon some workers extracting bones from a swampy morass known as the Mer au Song. The bones were of various sorts, and being the curious man he was, he filled his pocket with some of them, hoping for some further examination. It turned out they were bones from the dodo, the supposed mythical creature, according to one of the leading experts on the bird at the time, a guy by the name of A.M. Clark. This was so important a discovery that Clark obtained leave to go out to the morass to personally search for more. He eventually dispatched a large quantity to the British Museum, which sold for several £100s. To this day, the dodo bones from the morass are still in the UK. You can see them in the World Museum in Liverpool, the Yorkshire Museum and the Leeds Museums and Galleries. Higginson died in Wellington in 1900, aged 63. He's commemorated by way of a stained glass window at the Wellington Cathedral of St Paul. The window is decorated with an image of the Carrawau Gorge Suspension Bridge, one of his finest works of course, and there's also a dodo bird on the window too. Well, just before we move on again, folks, I just want to have another look at this view, because I think this is fantastic. All around you here, you've just got gorgeous Yorkshire scenery. In the distance, you have some hills. I've been seeing those all morning, actually, because you can see those from the other places we've been this week. And in this direction, it's flatter, but still looks great. And you know the great thing about this view? Here in Thormanby, they even provide you with a bench to admire it all. How thoughtful. Now we're on the square, so let's walk around all four sides. Where two of them meet is that old chapel. This was Wesleyan and it was built in 1875. It's now been converted into a private house. That's about all I got for this one, so let's move on around the square via Back Lane. At the end of Back Lane, you're then on Wentworth Avenue. This is where most of the newer houses in Thormanby can be found. As a village, Thormanby grew up along what is now the A19, so understandably, the oldest properties are there. During the post-war period, expansion, logically, radiated from that central road. Thormanby still has a population that barely gets over 100, but it is growing. In the last few years, Highfield Croft has been added to the housing stock. Thormanby has been without an active post office for quite some time now. The nearest one is in Easingwold. Thormanby also has no shops, it's way too small to sustain any. You would have thought that being located on the A19 would act as a distinct advantage. That fact used to be an advantage for pub owners around here. We already know pubs are usually plentiful on the old turnpikes, of course. However, not everywhere can boast an array of inns, and Thormanby doesn't have any these days. There were 3 of them throughout the 17th century and the 18th century though. One of them survived right up until the end of the 20th, but now it's closed. It was called the Black Bull and it's been turned into a house. This has quite the tale behind it. This is the old Black Bull, quite an extravagant looking old pub you have to say. So why did this close? Well, in 1999, that decision lay with the landlord, Robert Med. He described the pub in an interview with The Guardian as being like a morgue because 2/3 of the locals simply did not go to it. At the time, it was selling just 16 pints a day. Residents opposed his application to convert the pub because they believed the village still needed a focal point. In response, Med claimed that Thormanby has no community spirit. Some villagers suggested that not many people used it because the last time it was renovated was in the 1970s, therefore it wasn't very inviting. The whole thing was a bizarre battle between Med wanting it to close and the council fighting to keep it open. Usually in that situation, the roles are reversed. Literally next door to the Black Bull is the old rectory. This is a Grade 2 listed 18th century Georgian residence built in 1737. It gained a schoolroom in 1786. Today it's just a house, but it used to be another business that's now gone to the wall. It became a B&B, which is now permanently closed. Okay, so we've reached Moor Lane, and this is a good time to tell you a bit about Thormanby Mill and why we're not going to it. Out there in the countryside to the sort of west of the village, there is an old mill, or there was an old mill. It's not there anymore because it's been knocked down, and the site of it is now just a field. There is still a house there which is called Thormanby Mill. It's got a farm attached to it. I think on the map it was referred to as New Mill, Thormanby New Mill, something like that. And because it's just a house, there isn't really much point in going to it. It's not actually within the boundaries anyway, because the boundary actually runs between the two sites. The new mill is actually not within Thormanby, the site of the old mill is, but of course there's nothing there. So because there's nothing there, there's not really any point going down there. What we can do instead though is talk about another house which I found quite interesting. At the end of Moor Lane you have this little entrance drive here. That takes you to Thormanby Hall. Now this has got quite a story to it. Before we reach the end of this walk, we have Thormanby Hall to cover on the end of Church Lane. Although covered in foliage, it's a notable property this. Thormanby Hall stands out from other attractive country homes for several reasons, including its fascinating history. The exact date of its construction is unknown, but this house was part of the Viscount Down estate for much of its history. Within the property's garden sits a stone folly that contains the rose window from the Cistercian Abbey of Jervaux, built in 1156. There's a gap in the abbey's ruins today where it once was. Thormanby Hall has been heavily extended and refurbished since it was built. One extension was added in 1990 in the style and dimensions of St Mary's Church just up the road. The flooring even came from a church in Leeds, and the large 7-foot-high fireplace was made from Wensleydale stone. The property has an emphasis on nature, with the exterior covered in natural greenery. The mature gardens that surround it all consist of beautiful trees, evergreen shrubs and colourful flower beds. In all, this is a stupendous house that has no right being as rustic and traditional as it looks and sounds, but that's the beauty of these Yorkshire villages. They often surprise you. And having completed our journey around Thormanby, we are done with this latest run in Hambleton. There's been some crackers in that bunch. In a few weeks' time, I'll be back to North Yorkshire as I make some inroads into Harrogate again. For this year though, Hambleton is done and I'll be back in 2026. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.